Breaking news, or at least breaking according to the internet detectives who haven't slept in 3 days, fueled by coffee, screenshots, and a growing sense that something just doesn't add up. Because tell me this, how does a so-called real estate mogul keep building million-dollar dreams that stubbornly refuse to sell, not once, not twice, but repeatedly? How do luxury homes keep appearing, complete with grand announcements and confident timelines, only to quietly sit on the market collecting dust, speculation, and unanswered questions? And how does a critical conversation, one that could change how viewers understand the entire narrative, just vanish from television like it never existed? Coincidence or convenience? Tonight, we are pulling the curtain back on a story that smells less like fresh lumber and more like damage control. This isn't just about deleted footage or a missed edit. This is about patterns. This is about questionable decisions, selective storytelling, and that unmistakable feeling viewers get when something important has been deliberately left out. You know the feeling, the one where you tilt your head and say, "Wait a minute, that math ain't mathing." Why was one conversation suddenly too hot for TV? Who decided viewers didn't name the full picture? And why is it that every time accountability shows up on screen, someone behind the scenes suddenly yells, "Cut"? Buckle up, because this isn't just tea. This is a full-blown reality TV reckoning. Let's start exactly where the cameras quietly looked away, because the real controversy doesn't live in the footage that aired. It lives in the silence. And that silence speaks louder than any polished confessional, inspirational soundtrack, or carefully framed montage ever could. A simple question, one question, about a past investment property cracked open a narrative that had been carefully packaged for viewers season after season. Once that question surfaced, everything else suddenly made sense. The storyline viewers were meant to accept without scrutiny began to wobble, and the cracks were impossible to ignore. This wasn't just any property. This was an investment home that was supposed to sell or rent, and it did neither. No quick sale, no steady rental income, no triumphant vision realized moment. Instead, what followed was improvisation, explanation, and a quiet revision of the story being told. According to chatter from extended footage and people claiming insider knowledge, the decision for someone to live in that home was not a strategic business move. It wasn't part of some master plan. It was surrender, a last resort after the market refused to cooperate and the numbers refused to lie. And from a business perspective, that is exactly where eyebrows shoot straight up. Because repeating a failed formula while expecting applause is not confidence. It is denial dressed up as ambition. Huntsville is not overflowing with buyers lining up for multi-million-dollar properties, no matter how often the narrative insists otherwise. Yet the blueprint keeps getting reused, like failure is just a misunderstood phase that will eventually turn into success if you believe hard enough. That's why the deleted exchange mattered so much. It didn't expose a one-time hiccup, it exposed a pattern, and patterns are far more dangerous to an image than isolated mistakes. Originally, viewers were shown optimism, positive projections, hopeful timelines, confident language. What they were not shown was accountability. What was edited out were the hard questions that challenged the storyline at its foundation. When someone questions why unsold inventory keeps piling up, that is not negativity, that is not hating, that is due diligence, that is logic. That is the exact question any serious investor, lender, or buyer would ask. Yet somehow that logic became too inconvenient for primetime television. And then there's the production angle, which only deepens the suspicion, because cutting critical context does not protect the audience, it protects an image. Selective editing has a funny way of turning hard questions into soft montages and uncomfortable moments into inspirational background music. And when that happens repeatedly, viewers are not wrong for feeling manipulated. Reality television may thrive on drama, but it also depends on trust. Once that trust starts to erode, every storyline feels staged, every win feels exaggerated, and every failure feels deliberately obscured. Add to that the ongoing whispers about licenses, stalled projects, and grand announcements that quietly fade into nothing, and suddenly this stops being gossip. It starts looking like a trend. Success is usually loud when it is real. It announces itself through results, not explanations. Silence, on the other hand, tends to follow exaggeration. When projects disappear without updates and timelines keep shifting without clarity, the audience notices, and increasingly, they are no longer willing to look the other way. Outside the carefully edited world of television, audiences have grown sharper. They are less willing to accept surface-level storytelling and far more interested in receipts than rhetoric. They notice when explanations change, when goals move, and when criticism disappears from the screen but explodes online. They notice when questions are asked off-camera but avoided on it. That growing awareness is what makes this moment different from past seasons, because the audience is no longer just watching, they are investigating. They are connecting dots, revisiting old footage, and asking why certain truths feel permanently delayed. When reality television forgets that viewers are intelligent, backlash becomes inevitable. And that backlash isn't about hate, it's about trust. Trust that what you're watching, even if dramatized, is not deliberately misleading. Trust that producers aren't quietly deciding what viewers are allowed to question. Once audiences believe they are being managed instead of informed, every future storyline is questioned, every success is doubted, every excuse is weighed against memory, and receipts, along with patterns, do not lie. They repeat, especially when cameras keep missing the moments that explain everything. Once the dust settles on the missing footage and the unanswered questions, the story only gets messier. What was hidden becomes far more telling than what was shown. Suddenly, a pattern emerges that cannot be ignored. Expensive homes remain unsold. Licenses are questioned. Projects announced with fanfare slowly vanish into limbo as if they were never real. Insiders whisper about lavish spending that looks impressive on camera but makes little sense on a balance sheet. Extravagant furnishings, high-end appliances, costly landscaping that never yielded meaningful returns. And yet, the same approach continues. Martell continues to pursue the same formula with the same unflinching confidence, as if repetition alone is a strategy. Critics call it ego-driven folly. Supporters call it vision. Everyone else is left scratching their heads, trying to understand what really drives these decisions. And the public reaction only amplifies the scrutiny, because social media has become a magnifying glass where every misstep is dissected, every explanation challenged, and every success scrutinized for authenticity. In that environment, confidence without results stops looking aspirational and starts looking performative. When Chris called out the repeated failures, it was more than just critique. It was a mirror reflecting the disconnect between ambition and reality. At the same time, it raised uncomfortable questions about how much of the narrative is shaped in editing rooms rather than construction sites. That fuels speculation, with some sources claiming production is invested in maintaining a specific image, shielding certain cast members from criticism while exposing others to maximum drama. Whether true or not, the perception alone is damaging, because perception is everything in reality television. The fallout is instantaneous. Online forums light up with commentary, memes, and speculative theories that spiral into viral discussions. Each new leak or revelation reinforces the belief that what viewers see on television is only the tip of the iceberg. And with that realization comes a hunger for transparency that remains frustratingly unfulfilled. The more viewers feel information is being withheld, the more aggressively they search for it elsewhere. And that is a dangerous game for any production to play. As the controversy simmers, attention naturally turns to Melody's sold-out event, a public celebration that stands in sharp contrast to the turmoil behind the cameras. It becomes more than just an event, it becomes a statement, a reminder that influence, relevance, and success can exist independently of manufactured drama. The crowd, the energy, the undeniable reach of the moment all signal something reality television often forgets. Real success doesn't need editing, it doesn't need a storyline. It shows up in real time, with real people and real impact. Melody's moment forces viewers to reconsider what authenticity actually looks like, because nothing about that event felt curated for television. It wasn't framed, softened, or packaged. It was tangible, earned. And in parallel, it quietly challenged the idea that relevance must be tied to a show. Sometimes stepping outside the circus is the clearest demonstration of growth, and that contrast only sharpens the questions viewers are already asking. Then enters Carlos King, swinging verbal chairs at reality stars who quit the show or avoid conflict. His commentary adds another layer to the conversation, emphasizing that participation in reality television comes with accountability. His message is blunt. If you sign up for the spotlight, you don't get to pick and choose the consequences. But his critique also opens a broader discussion about fairness, about the ethics of editing, about audience manipulation, and about the pressures cast members face as they navigate fame, expectations, and relentless public judgment. However, from the outside, viewers saw a couple navigating fame, pressure, and shared business ventures. They saw smiles, ambition, and the illusion of partnership. But inside that relationship, Melody was dealing with control issues, emotional manipulation, and a man who prioritized how things looked over how they actually felt. She was expected to hold everything together while her world slowly unraveled. Smile for the cameras, keep the peace, protect the brand, protect the image. And for a long time, she did exactly that. Not because she was weak, but because she was trying to protect her family. Because when children are involved, silence often becomes a survival strategy. Martell, on the other hand, learned early that noise worked in his favor. If he talked enough, posted enough, explained enough, people would believe his version of events. He leaned heavily into charm, performance, and emotional storytelling, and for a while it worked. Fans defended him passionately, producers entertained him, the narrative stayed conveniently blurry, just unclear enough to allow doubt to exist on both sides. But Melody was paying attention in ways people didn't see. She noticed patterns, timelines that didn't add up, stories that shifted depending on the audience, words that sounded convincing but didn't match actions. And instead of confronting him publicly, she started documenting privately. What nobody expected was how far Martell would push things once he felt like he was losing control of the situation. That's when the line got crossed, not just emotionally, but strategically. Moves were made that felt intentional rather than impulsive, moments that felt staged rather than organic, actions that looked less like healing and more like provocation. And instead of breaking Melody down, something inside her shifted. Because once you cross a woman who has already survived the worst version of you, you unlock a version of her that no longer reacts emotionally. She responds strategically. This is where the story truly changes. While Martell was going live, venting, explaining, over-explaining, spiraling, and attempting to control the narrative in real time, Melody was doing something entirely different. She was organizing screenshots, messages, financial records, dates, conversations, not emotional assumptions or hearsay, actual receipts. And this wasn't about revenge, this was about protection. Because when someone keeps trying to rewrite history, the only thing that stops them is documented truth. Insiders began whispering that Melody wasn't just upset, she was prepared. Legal teams were involved, professional advice was being taken. Every public move Martell made was being monitored carefully, and the louder he became, the more he exposed himself. Because when you talk too much, you forget what you already said, and when you forget, contradictions pile up quickly. Melody didn't need to expose him immediately. She didn't need to rush the process. She let him reveal himself piece by piece. What shocked people the most was her restraint. No messy interviews, no emotional public breakdowns, no social media dragging sessions, just calm, controlled distance. And that silence drove Martell crazy. Because he needed a reaction. He needed her to respond so he could pivot, spin, and perform. But she didn't give him that power. She waited. And when the evidence finally began circulating, it wasn't dramatic screenshots thrown online for clout or trending hashtags. It was structured, detailed, clean, the kind of proof that doesn't disappear after a news cycle, the kind that lives in files, meetings, and courtrooms. Suddenly, the tone shifted. Martell didn't sound confident anymore. His live videos felt frantic rather than controlled. His explanations felt rushed and defensive. He kept saying there was more to the story, but the problem was Melody already had the entire book. People began revisiting old scenes with new eyes. Moments that once felt confusing suddenly made sense. Statements Melody made years ago started sounding less like bitterness and more like warnings. Fans slowly realized she wasn't angry, she was exhausted. Exhausted from carrying the truth alone while someone else played the victim publicly. Once the truth was backed by proof, the sympathy Martell once enjoyed started drying up quickly. But here's the part nobody expected. Melody wasn't just defending herself, she was redefining her power. Every move she made after that felt intentional. Business announcements, appearances, brand partnerships, growth. She wasn't hiding, she just wasn't explaining herself anymore. And that's when it became clear this was never about winning an argument or clearing her name in public opinion. This was about winning her peace. Martell attempted to regain control by pulling out familiar tactics, emotional posts, strategic appearances, pulling other people into the narrative to soften his image and shift focus. But each attempt only reminded people why Melody left in the first place: the manipulation, the distractions, the refusal to take accountability. And the more he tried to clean it up, the messier it looked. Because once people see the pattern, they can't unsee it. What hit hardest was how this affected the family dynamic, because at the center of all of this are children watching everything unfold. Melody didn't just have to think about her reputation. She had to think about what kind of environment she was protecting, what kind of behavior she was normalizing, what kind of example she was setting. And once she realized that silence and proof were safer than chaos and noise, she chose that path without hesitation. You could see the difference in her energy. She appeared calmer, more focused, unbothered. While Martell looked restless and reactive, Melody looked grounded. And that contrast said everything. Because when someone is truly unbothered, they don't need to convince you. They let results speak. And Melody's results spoke loudly. Brands noticed, opportunities opened, rooms shifted. She was no longer attached to the chaos. She became a living example of what happens when a woman stops explaining herself and starts protecting herself. And that scared people who benefited from her silence before. Because a woman with receipts, boundaries, and peace is not easy to control. As the emotional dust settled, one truth became undeniable. Melody didn't drop proof to embarrass Martell. She dropped it to end the game, to stop the narrative manipulation, to draw a line that could not be crossed again. And once that line was drawn, everything changed. Martell now finds himself reacting instead of leading, defending instead of performing, and the consequences he once avoided are catching up, quietly but steadily. The sympathy is gone, the patience is thin, and the audience that once cheered is now questioning everything. Melody, meanwhile, isn't celebrating, she isn't gloating, she's building a future that doesn't depend on chaos, building a life that doesn't require explanation, and that may be the most powerful part of this entire story. Taken together, these threads, Martell's questionable business decisions, selective production editing, Melody's independent success, and Carlos King's pointed observations, converge into a narrative that is as compelling as it is controversial. It keeps audiences on edge, dissecting motives, questioning authenticity, and debating where the line between entertainment and reality should be drawn. And what becomes increasingly clear is that repeated risks without reflection lead to skepticism. When image management overtakes transparency, the cracks inevitably show. So here we are, with speculation rampant, trust eroding, and stakes higher than ever. Viewers are waiting, not just for the next episode, but for the moment when the truth finally breaks through the carefully constructed facades. Because in this world, success, failure, authenticity, and perception are constantly intertwined, and those who underestimate the audience do so at their own peril. So let me ask you, what do you think is really going on behind the scenes? Are Martell's repeated high-end builds a bold vision, or is it ego disguised as ambition? Was production right to cut that critical footage, or are viewers being deliberately denied the full story? And does Melody's sold-out event prove that you don't need a reality show to make an impact, or is it just a rare win in a world full of edited narratives? These are the questions you need to ask yourself, because the truth is rarely served on a silver platter. Reality TV, business, and public perception collide in ways that are messy, dramatic, and often unfair. And the only way to understand what's really happening is to look beyond the clips, the sound bites, and the selective highlights. Take a moment, scroll through the evidence, think critically, decide for yourself who is making smart moves, who is being misrepresented, and who might just be repeating mistakes for the sake of an image. If this story shocked you, if it got you thinking, don't just watch and walk away. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, share your theory about what's really happening, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories everyone else tries to gloss over. Because this kind of investigation keeps the conversation alive, and your voice is part of it.